Hey, what's up everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, coming to you live from Budapest, Hungary. Today is August 16th, 2025, about 9:30 a.m. where I'm at right now. And we are continuing our 13th book in our Book to React series. This is episode 21 of Black Bolshevik, Autobiography of an Afro-American Communist, written by Harry Haywood Hall, a black man who was born from slaves at the beginning of the 20th century, and he went on to live an incredible life as a member of the Communist Party, as a lifelong revolutionary, as a military veteran, as a soldier, so many things, man. So many things he did in his life. Marxist intellectual, black nationalist in his truest form. This man was truly a hero to me, and so much I have gained from his life by going over the pages of this book bit by bit with all of you in public. And this has been one of the most fascinating books that we've read in the Book to React series, where we read an entire book from cover to cover, live on stream for the people, and engage with the content. Think of this as an open, book club where everybody's welcome to join in. Everybody can gain knowledge from these books, and I do my best to try to preserve these rare books that are hard to find in actual print form. Now, you can get this book at libcom.org. Just scroll down and click the attachment right here and download it if you don't like the way I'm reading it. You can also go to marxist.org and download the book right here as well. Another copy is right there, but if you want the physical form, it's very hard to find. There was a paperback version of this book. It seems like it's back on the shelf. I'm surprised. The paperback version is back on the shelf. For a while, it was unavailable. It was unavailable for some time, but now it's back on the shelf on Amazon. You can also get the hardcover for about your monthly rent, about 640 pounds, good sir. You can get that yourself. And today we are going to be reading Chapter 19, World War II and the Merchant Marines. In our last live stream yesterday, we read The Spanish Civil War, A Call to Arms, where Harry Haywood was talking about his time going to fight in Spain against the fascists that were trying to take over the Republican government. And he witnessed so much death. He also witnessed the disorganization of the leftists who were fighting against the fascists in Spain. And once again, this crystallizes to me one of the major themes of this book, which is disappointment over time. It's the fading of idealism to some degree. This book is a long, drawn-out sort of drama or tragedy because, this man, dedicated his life to a cause, and the cause sort of turned its back on him, or turned in a way that, he didn't really agree with or see himself aligning with. And there were forces within the fights that he was within the struggles that he was advocating for that were trying to, basically capitulate too early or dissuade itself from radicalness. You get what I'm saying? So that's what I'm noticing throughout this book. Now, before we start reading chapter 19, which I'm very excited to get to, and we're going to blow through it very quickly because I have a lot of work to do today, I want to read this comment that I got from a new subscriber on this channel. His name is Kareth J. He's been supporting my content since I started reading this book, and I have a lot of love and respect for this man. And I usually don't have a lot of respect for my commenters. There's only a few, and I can name them. They're literally on one hand of people I have respect for on this channel. But this guy here comes across as like a true man, like a man in the truest form, and also as a person of respect. And because he always talks to me respectfully, even when we disagree, as you're about to see. So I want to read these comments right here in relation to yesterday's live stream and in general, what he thinks about my content here. So Kareth J. left a comment that says, "Man, thank you for putting your audience through this intellectual marathon. It has enriched me greatly. To touch on your point of contention with the AES, that's the African Sahelian states or something like that, I would be careful of the tenets capitalist democracy that promotes free speech or free markets. These predicates are precisely the Trojan horse colonizers use to undermine state-building projects and internal development. I think you advocate for everybody being able to express themselves freely with state repression. Freely from state repression. I think that's what he means. I get that. But to make a crude analogy, that's like permitting everyone to talk while the movie is playing at a public theater or driving without a seatbelt. Restraint is necessary, as even the U.S. example shows. Remember when Anderson Cooper couldn't cover the Cuban medical response to the Haitian earthquake in 2010, or even the current media blackout on Gaza. And I get that. I understand that, the concepts of free speech, free markets, free enterprise, these are liberal bourgeoisie ideas that manipulate us into thinking that, capitalism creates a type of freedom for us, or liberal democracy is the end-all be-all of what a free society looks like for the individual. I totally get that, Kareth, and I think you also understand where I'm coming from, where I'm saying, like, in the countries of Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, Guinea-Bissau, or if it's the other Guinea, I'm not sure which one had the coup and which one doesn't have freedom. I think, in the situation of those states, I don't like the idea of Toyota diplomacy. I don't like the idea of AK-47 politics, where a bunch of young men can just run up in the Capitol and depose a leader, dictatorial or not. I don't like that idea. And a lot of the times, the people that were being overthrown were democratically elected, such as the case of Mohamed Bazoum in Niger. I find it very funny that a lot of people are quick to say, freedom of speech, and let's not even phrase it as freedom of speech. Let's just say expression without repression. Expression without repression is willing to be sacrificed at the altar of economic development or state building for black people in Africa. We worship the state so much. I think this is the wrong framing that we're having. I assume Kareth J is a communist or a Marxist or a socialist of some sort, and then this is not me attacking him, but I find this funny that we're so quick at the altar of state building, the idea of what I really think is the Wakandaism that exists in our mind, the idea that, at any cost, we need to develop Africa, and development in Africa has to be some sort of, strong state where the state has, economic development and infrastructure that looks like the Western states. Why does development have to be such? I argue. Is the final goal of what we're trying to do as socialists and Marxists just to make strong economic states, or is it for the final emancipation of the individual and for us as a collective, as for society? That's what I'm arguing here. If we have to take a step back and say expression without repression should be sacrificed so that, Burkina Faso can have, running water and electricity 24/7 like any other Western developed country, and I hate the term Western, but you get the idea, then what's the point of that? What's the point of that? You know what I mean? I hate to quote Thomas Jefferson, the slave owner, pedophile, but, people that would sacrifice liberty for security, and I'll say liberty for economic development in this case, deserve neither. You get what I'm saying? And that's what I find very frustrating about this discussion. You know what I mean? And I appreciate Kareth J for bringing this to me, because that is something I never thought about before, in the sense that, me framing how my feelings towards Ibrahim Traore and all the other coup leaders who ran up in the Capitol with Toyota pickups and AK-47s and said, all right, now it's our turn. What was the point of that? What was the point? Is the point just to, have a type of Afro-fascism where we're proud of our states? Is this a type of crude Garveyism? Are we resorting back to a type of Garveyism? You get what I'm saying? That I find to be very frustrating. That's what I find to be very frustrating about, dealing with the Ibrahim Traore fans. And I'm not saying Kareth is like an Ibrahim Traore fanboy, but this is my major departure with a lot of the black commentators about what's happening in Africa. I do not like at all the idea of, the coups are our way to final liberation. I don't worship the state that much. I am totally anti-nationalist. I'm not nationalist to the point where, everything should be sacrificed so that we have strong black Wakanda states. And we won't get Wakanda states with young men running up in the Capitol with them AKs. That's not how we're going to get there. That's not freedom. Anyway, I'm going to continue here. Kareth says, also be careful with your interlocutors online. Content like yours is monitored, and one of the things that can be done is inserting quirky elements, i.e. Vikings, to throw off the discussion, or racist tirades to prevent meaningful audience participation or engagement. I've seen that happen in the past when blogs first came on the scene. Shout out to Kareth J for, that he's looking out for me. This is big homie. This is big homie looking out for the little homie. You know what I mean? So he's like saying like, listen, these people are trying to throw you off your game, throw you off your square. And yesterday when we were doing our live stream, we got into this big debate about whether the Vikings were colonists or not. And I have no idea how to answer that question like intellectually or meaningfully. I don't, get it. But I get what he's coming from. I've been on YouTube for a long time, since about 2017 or something like that. This channel is not a major money maker. I didn't plan for it to be. It was solely, entirely my platform, my venue for free expression and for education for myself and others, and also to share my life and document, that I was here on this earth. You get what I'm saying? And I know that my channel is being monitored. I know possibly I've been shadow banned, but I kind of don't care. I don't care if I get 100,000 followers, 1 million followers, or if I stay stuck at 5,000 for the rest of my time on YouTube. The point is that, somebody out there will pick up on these books that I've read, or the movie reviews my wife and I has done, or the travel content that I've released, or the writings that I've done, the philosophical treatise I put together, and find some meaning in it or find some benefit in it. That's all I hope for. I don't hope to gain 1 million followers and get super rich on YouTube. It would be nice. It would alleviate some things. I'm not going to say it wouldn't be something that I would try or I wouldn't welcome if it did happen, but it's not the main goal. You know what I mean? And if YouTube shuts this content down, then c'est la vie. C'est la vie. I mean, we're doing very radical politics over here and radical readings over here, so I wouldn't be surprised. Even if I don't curse, even if I don't, go off on a racist tirade or or roast the white man every now and then, this channel might get shut down just because of the radical content that it holds. Kareth J also says, wishing you success, brother, and I appreciate that solely. I think, once again, I respect Kareth J a lot. There are very few people I respect on YouTube. Very few people that I respect in my comment section, because most of my comment section is just ridiculousness. Also, shout out to Kamal, Autistic Cool, I think. He says, I've known well about miners in Appalachia, but this clarifies more than ever. Shout out to Autistic Cool for that. Yeah, that was during the chapter when we were reading about Harry organizing out there in Appalachia, right? And yeah, shout out to Kareth J for once again these comments and everybody else who's been supporting this reading of this very long book. We're about to finish it up. After we finish today's chapter, we'll only have 3. We will only have 3 chapters left, so 3 more episodes. Let's get through chapter 19, and then I gotta get to work. So, Chapter 19, World War II and the Merchant Marines. I returned home from Spain in the fall of 1937. Soon after arriving, I heard for the first time the malicious rumors which had preceded me. I was being accused of leaving the front without permission, of running away. Browder's first words to me were, Harry, had you been a better organizer, you wouldn't have gotten into that fix. I had to admit that there was some truth in this. I'd done pretty well in Chicago, but there I had the benefit of collective leadership. In Spain, a more experienced organizer would have moved cautiously, not impulsively, as I had. He would have made a more careful analysis of the situation, arrived at an estimate of exactly what could be done, and not allowed himself to be pushed into premature action. As a staff officer, I lived in brigade headquarters, separately from the men in the trenches. A more experienced organizer would have made a greater effort to get out among the men and spend less time at headquarters. I had made some mistakes in Spain, but I did not feel anything I had done warranted the type of rumor and slander that I was now confronted with. I had led the struggle to improve conditions in the brigade after Jarama. I had made tactical errors in carrying out this struggle, but I expected and felt I deserved the support of our leading comrades. Now I found myself the victim of a rumor campaign that could have only started in Spain. I felt that at least the brigade leadership, which now included Steve Nelson and Lawrence, could have explained to the men why and how it was decided that I should leave the front. But they never did. Instead, it was left that Harry Haywood left the front, providing fertile soil for rumor mongering. Now, for people that didn't hear the last chapter, basically Harry Haywood was a political commissar for the soldiers on the front. Basically, he was trying to keep their morale high, keep them focused on the objective, remind them what they're fighting for, and also get them food. So he left the front one time when they were trying to attack this position on a hill that the fascists were on. And he went to go get food because they were left on the side of the hill starving for like a few days. And when he comes back, basically everybody's dead. Everybody got shot down, right? And that wasn't anything he could have prevented. And he told his commander that he was going to get food, but they blamed him for leaving right when the action happened. But had he not left when the action happened, he might have died, and we would not have had this book, and we wouldn't be here today. But I'm going to continue here. I was in no position to fight the rumors, however. First, I hesitated to bring the whole business out into the open in the midst of the war. Thank you, dear. Also, to defend myself would necessitate bringing back to the forefront people and events which had drifted into history as the bitter fighting in Spain continued. Gal had been dismissed from the Republican Army for mistakes, including the criminal blunders at Jarama. Nathan was killed. Cunningham and Aitken repatriated. Klaus had been transferred to the Thalman Brigade, and only Kopek remained as the old leadership. The men who survived Jarama were veterans now, and most significantly, the gross command errors at Jarama's Pingaron Heights were not repeated, thus pushing these events into the background where they lost the sharp significance they had while I was in Spain. I was demoralized and depressed. I had no other course but to accept the decision to leave the matter in abeyance until a later date. The rumors, however, persisted, undermining my role as a leading party member and questioning my integrity. At the time, I saw this slander campaign as an unwarranted attack and personally as a tremendous setback. Only years later was I able to see how this attack on a leading black cadre was part of the overall thrust in the leadership of the party to liquidate the national question and our leading role in the struggle. That is, the Browderite leadership made good use of the political infighting in Spain. So basically what he's saying, you know, Browder is famously the guy who led the Communist Party into like watering down the most radical aspects of the platform. And they were trying to, you know, push Haywood out, the old communists, especially the more radical ones. And Harry Haywood is all about, you know, literal black nationalism. And if you don't know his version of black nationalism, it's the idea that black people in the South have a right to self-determination, meaning they should start their own country. They should be able to take the land back from the white farmers who owned it, kill the Boer, rah, 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 and full economic and equal rights for black citizens. That's his version of black nationalism. And the Communist Party, in some weird attempt that Browder thought would make them more popular, wanted to stamp down on all that radical stuff and move in a more centrist type of way, centrist on the far right, if that makes sense, and essentially become a far left wing to the liberal left wing, which is in that time the Republican Party, and would switch to the Democrats. Basically, that he wanted to take the CPUSA and just make them, you know, left-wing Democrats. You get what I'm saying? So, anyway, that's a very interesting take. So once again, this book is a tragedy. It's one long tragedy that seems to be stretched out over 30 years. The sharpest attacks came from James Ford. He lost no time in moving to take advantage of my loss of prestige as a result of Spain. In my absence, Ford had continued to build his one-man leadership of Afro-American work. Under his influence, the Harlem leaders tended to become a closed group. Anyone who did not provide Ford with uncritical support was suspected of being anti-leadership. As head of the National Negro Commission, Ford tried to extend his style of leadership to the national scene. In this, he had the active support of Browder, who played upon Ford's personal ambitions with uncritical praise, referring to him as the Frederick Douglass of our time. Glazing! As a result, he became one of Browder's key henchmen. Ford also continued a vendetta against the older comrades, which eventually led to the expulsion of Briggs and Moore. Before Spain, I had sufficient prestige as a leader and theoretician in my own right to resist this tendency. But now, with my standing largely eroded by the difficulties in Spain, Ford moved to consolidate his position and oust me from leadership once and for all. What I'm getting also from the, insights in the book into the political moverings is that an organization is really just, an organization is only as good as the people that are a part of it. And it doesn't matter what organization it is. You get what I'm saying? And this is an organization full of leftists, full of people with big ideas and sincere convictions about helping the working class and the repressed minorities. But some of these people are straight assholes. You get what I'm saying? As he describes them. You know what I mean? Like James Ford, like Browder, like Lovestone, like Kopik. You know what I mean? So many of the characters that Harry talks about are just straight up dickheads. You know what I mean? And so, even though they agree with Harry on everything, you know, politically and socially, so it's hard to get along with some people. You know what I mean? And it seems like the CPUSA attracted a lot of assholes at that time, or just straight up dickheads. You know? I don't know. That's the way Harry is framing it. I'm going to continue. Although I had my differences with Ford, I did not expect the type of veiled attack which he launched. This attack was revealed through a series of underhanded blows. The first was an article I had written as part of the party's pre-convention discussion in early 1938. The article, The White South and the People's Front, was submitted to the Communist, the party's theoretical organ. It was a polemic against Francis Franklin, a young Southern intellectual who was at the time the head of the education department of the YCL. He had published an article in the January 1938 issue of The Communist for a free, happy, and prosperous South, which minimized the role of revolutionary reconstruction and made unwarranted concessions to reactionary distortions of the period, particularly concerning the role of the carpetbaggers. Under the guise of winning the white Southern masses to our program, he distorted the revolutionary thrust of Reconstruction. His article was, in effect, an attack on some of the basic tenets of our revolutionary position. I answered in my article, published in April 1938, by reassuring our position on the revolutionary role of Reconstruction and the so-called carpetbag rule as the most democratic period that the South had ever known. So basically, he's fighting revisionism. You know, people saying that Reconstruction wasn't that, you know, radical, and basically the white. What I've always thought about carpetbaggers, and if you learn American history, if you had a good American history teacher in high school, they teach you that the carpetbaggers are basically white Northerners who came down to take advantage of the destruction in the South and just reap economic benefits. And I grew up in Monroe, Louisiana, and I went to public school, and the way they teach about the carpetbaggers, they always talk about them as like greedy type of like Jewish type of characters. That's the way they frame it. Like, you get what I'm saying? And this guy here, who is supposedly a communist or a radical, is saying like, yeah, the carpetbag myth is, the carpetbaggers generally were, you know, the bad guys in Reconstruction. And Reconstruction wasn't as radical of a time as we like to think. This is a leftist saying this, when Reconstruction undoubtedly was one of the most radical times Reconstruction was actually, you know, the closest we ever got to making this country, America, the like most democratic. You know what I mean? It's when we were truly close to having our full revolution, but the revolution was betrayed. And, you know, there's more to that, but I'll wrap that up there. Let's continue. So to my surprise, I picked up the April issue of The Communist and saw that my article had been printed just as I wrote it, but under the name of Theodore Bassett. Bassett was one of James Ford's inner circle and educational director in Harlem. Damn, they just jacked his piece. Straight up jacked it. I approached V.J. Jerome, the Communist editor, to find out what had happened. Jerome stated that Ford had insisted that my name be removed from the article for political reasons. Obviously, Ford pirated this article to prevent me from regaining any prominence and in order to enhance the prestige of his Harlem leadership. He was able to do this by invoking my Spanish difficulties as a reason for not allowing my name to appear in print. The 10th convention of the CPUSA was held in New York in May 1938. There, I was removed from the Politburo and the Central Committee. My name was simply omitted from the slate of candidates submitted to the convention by the presiding committee. Browder was the person who informed me of the move, citing the reason of mistakes made in Spain. Damn, so he went to go fight in Spain, risked his life, and he suffered massive consequences for it because he wasn't there to get killed. That's what I'm saying, man. That's crazy. It's like, you're nobody till somebody kills you. Like, what did Biggie say? This is crazy. Okay, he did more than like 99% of like the leftists who say, yeah, we need to fight fascism. We need to defeat the fascists at all turns, punch a fascist, shoot a fascist. Okay, we're going to do that in Spain. All right, I'll see y'all guys later. Y'all have a good time out there. Take pictures. Like, what is that? That's crazy. He went there to fight, and he made a mistake by not being there on the front line to get shot and have his brains blown out? What? Anyway, after 12 years of being on the party payroll, I was suddenly faced with the need to find employment outside. For a well-known communist, it was not easy. In the summer of 1939, the World's Fair opened in New York City. Isidor Schneider, a left-wing writer and poet, headed up the publicity of the Soviet pavilion. He took me on as his assistant. My job was to popularize the pavilion among blacks and to publicize Soviet achievement in solving national and racial questions. It was an interesting job. I put advertisements in the black press and organized delegations of prominent black leaders to visit the exhibit. We held a press conference of black editors and invited them to dinner at the pavilion. My still fluent knowledge of Russian proved very useful, and I translated for the Soviet guides when groups visited. It wasn't long before Ford got wind of my activities, however. He told me angrily, "You know you shouldn't have taken this job. You're too well known a communist." According to him, public relations should be handled by a non-party person. Otherwise, the effort to publicize the exhibit would be narrowed. I certainly didn't agree with what he had said, and told him so. But he insisted that I resign, or he would take steps to have me removed. I went to see Schneider and learned that Ford had already talked to him. I had been red-baited before, but always by the police or bourgeois press. Ford had added a new twist. I collected my wages and left. So basically, he got fired from a job because he was a communist by other communists. That's funny. Ford's vendetta continued through the summer of 1939. As the outbreak of World War approached, Japanese imperialists were stepping up propaganda campaign directed at blacks in the U.S., claiming to be the champions of the colored races. They attempted to use the national liberation movement of blacks for their own purposes against their U.S. imperialist rivals and to disrupt the popular anti-fascist forces. Cyril Briggs and I wrote a pamphlet to counter this pro-Japanese movement among blacks. The pamphlet refuted their spurious propaganda and exposed the Japanese plunder of northern China and their imperialist designs for Southeast Asia. The Negro Commission allowed the pamphlet to be published, but only after Ford had added his name and those of his close associates, Theodore Bassett and Abner Berry. In the early fall, Jack Stachel, National Organizational Secretary, called me into his office and asked if I wanted to go to Baltimore to head up Afro-American work for the Maryland District, which included Washington, D.C. I welcomed the opportunity to return to work as a party organizer and saw it as an indication that the personal attacks were coming to an end. Maryland provided a challenging place to work. There was the giant Bethlehem steel plant, Sparrows Point, which had a significant number of black workers. The drive to organize Little Steel had suffered a defeat at the 1937 Memorial Day massacre in South Chicago. Now the drive was regaining momentum. As one of the largest eastern seaports, the Baltimore waterfront was a hotbed of activity, led by the doughty, dynamic, and energetic Pat Whelan. There were also important black liberation struggles in the district. Baltimore was the scene of anti-police repression campaigns, and the Eastern Shore, a former slave breeding center and actually part of the Black Belt, was the site of periodic lynchings and frame-ups. I love how this book mentions so much like black history. Like in the beginning chapters 1, 2, and 3, there was so much like interesting black history that he mentioned. Like the, interracial balls in Minnesota. The slave breeding section of Baltimore. I didn't know that existed, right? Like, I love the little tidbits of history that we get from our ancestors through these pages, which is why we should pick up books. But I'm going to continue here. I stayed about a year before the shadow of Spain crept up on me. One of my most important tasks was organizing for the Third National Convention of the National Negro Congress. The organizing in preparation for the convention and the meeting itself provided important impetus for all the work in the district. John P. Davis, Executive Secretary of the NNC, asked to borrow some funds for the convention, promising to repay us as soon as it was over. I supported this request and we lent the NNC money from district funds. But Davis was unable to repay us as he had promised. Fields, the district organizer, took exception to this and we clashed sharply. Before the situation could be resolved, Fields went to the national office without my knowledge. He was able to convince them that I was not needed in the district. I was soon withdrawn, returning to New York in the fall of 1939. Sounds like he was bouncing around place to place, trying to find his footing again. You know what I mean? After getting kicked out of the Politburo, no longer a professional, political communist. Now he's just getting shuffled around from location to location, trying to do organizing and party work and, just not being accepted because people think he's a coward. People think he ran from the front line in Spain. He didn't get shot. If I was him, I would have shot myself. You get what I'm saying? Not shot myself in like a suicide type of way, but shot myself in like the knee. But like, see guys, see, I did get wounded in Spain. Look, right here. Quit calling me a coward. I would have shot myself because this is crazy. I can't believe so many people hated on him for this. This is why social media would have been good back then, because he could have went on IG Live on the front line and said, man, guys, I just came back with the pots and the food and the lentil soup and everybody's dead. You see this, man? I told them that I was going to go and I told them to stay still. Now look at them, dead. Look at them. Look at them, dead. You get what I'm saying? I'm sorry. This is ridiculous. I'm sorry. World War II, with its beginning in the fascist invasion of Ethiopia, China, and Spain, broke out in earnest with Hitler's lightning conquest of Poland in September 1939. The imperialist governments of France, Great Britain, and the U.S., which had been following a policy of appeasement towards the building up of the German war machine in the hopes of using it in an armed invasion of the Soviet Union, now found themselves threatened. Their scheme against the Soviets had been shaken up by the Non-Aggression Pact signed by the Soviets with Germany in August 1939. The Soviet policy had consistently urged joint action against fascist aggression, but the capitalist governments were not interested. The Soviets offered to defend Czechoslovakia, but the French refused to put their mutual defense pact into effect. The Soviets offered to defend Poland on the eve of the German invasion, but Poland refused to allow the Red Army units to cross the border. The British stubbornly refused any type of mutual assistance pact with the Soviet Union, hoping all the time for war between Germany and Russia. The Soviets thus moved to defend themselves and thwart this imperialist scheme, signing the Non-Aggression Pact with Germany, a brilliant and necessary diplomatic move. Very interesting that Harry is defending the Soviets signing a peace treaty with the Nazis in Germany. Very interesting. He's making the argument. He's making the argument, man, this is true tanky. This is true tanky. This is top-notch, true tanky shit. He said the Soviet Union made a brilliant and necessary diplomatic move by signing a non-aggression pact with Nazi Germany. I guess, man, I guess. Despite the fact that France and Britain were pledged to assist Poland, they did nothing in response to Hitler's invasion. For 6 months, neither side made a military move against the other. This period, the phony war, was used by the Western imperialists in a final attempt to turn the war against the 1939 war broke out between the Soviet Union and Finland. The immediate cause was German-inspired Finnish incursions into Soviet territory, greatly encouraged and fostered by attempts by the British and French to foment war against the Soviet Union. But Hitler had his own plan. Realizing the impossibility of waging war on both Eastern and Western fronts, he moved against the weaker opponents. In April 1940, German troops marched into Denmark and Norway. Finland proved the utter bankruptcy of British and French policy by allying itself with the fascists. On May 28th, the supposedly invincible armies of France were defeated and the British were driven into the sea at Dunkirk. In rapid succession, the countries of Western Europe came under Nazi control. Thus, satisfied that his western front was secure and not considering the British a serious threat to his rear, Hitler turned his attention eastward, viciously occupying Yugoslavia, Greece, and Albania, and bringing Bulgaria into the war as a fascist ally. Hitler overran the Balkans and prepared for his decisive blow of the war, the Soviet Union. The initial stage of the war, September 1939 to June 1941, was dominated by the imperialist powers and was a war for world domination. Our policy called for active support of China and all oppressed peoples in their struggle against fascism and for national independence. It called for ending the war as rapidly as possible on the basis of a democratic peace. Our main slogan was, "Keep America out of the imperialist war." The great sentiment for peace was reflected in the positions of both the AFL and the CIO, which went on record as opposing U.S. participation in the war. United Front organizations such as the NNC and the Southern Congress for Human Welfare and others adopted similar positions. Probably the largest of the many peace activities was the American Peace Mobilization, formed in Chicago on August 31st, 1940. It consisted of over 6,000 delegates representing about 12 million people in trade unions, youth organizations, women's clubs, and black groups. Under the banner of "For a People's Peace," it fought against further extension of the war. In October 1939, a few weeks after the fascist conquest of Poland, I found myself in the Veterans Hospital at Kingsbridge Road in the Bronx. I suffered a serious heart attack. So sad and so scary. I feel like I'm going to suffer a heart attack any day now. My condition was found to be service-connected, the result of the endocarditis I had suffered while in the Army during the First World War. This time, the diagnosis was valvular heart disease. Valvular heart disease. I was awarded full compensation, $100 per month, by the Veterans Administration. Okay, so he got some compensation, got some free money from the government, $100 a month. I wonder what that would be in today's money. Maybe a thou wow? Maybe a good thou wow? Anyway, R&R in the San Fernando Valley. After 3 months recuperation, I was released from the hospital and advised to take a long rest. Thinking that I might be incapacitated for life, I decided to go to Los Angeles, arriving there in the winter of 1940. I rented a small bungalow on the property of a comrade in the San Fernando Valley and stayed there over a year. It was on Van Nuys Road near the Pacoima Reservoir. My stay was very restful, and I became a member of the Southern California district of the party. There was a good party organization in the valley and a relatively large circle of sympathizers. The comrades were very solicitous towards me. Our party branch actively organized in the valley for the American Peace Mobilization, and we were able to send a strong delegation to Chicago as part of the Los Angeles contingent. Although still recuperating, I helped with this work by giving talks and leading discussions on the international situation and the progress of the war. It was in California that I met an old comrade, Belle Lewis, who had come from the East to recuperate from an illness. I was happy to see her again, having known her back east during the National Miners' Strike of 1931. She was a veteran communist and organizer for the National Miners' Strike Relief Organization in bloody Harlan County. During the strike, she had been jailed along with 5 other women who were framed up and known as the Kentucky Six. Later, she was a section organizer in Boston's Black Ghetto. Belle was a handsome, I hate when people call women handsome. That's crazy. Calling a woman handsome is crazy. Belle was a handsome, warm-hearted woman in her early 30s. She had Slavic features with a broad face and high cheekbones. That's hilarious. That's a hilarious way to describe her. We were both lonely and struck it off quite well together. She came to live with me in the valley, and later we were formally married. Our union was to last 15 years. Aw, third marriage. Third time's a charm, I guess. On June 22nd, 1941, Hitler launched his attack against the Soviet Union. This fateful action dramatically changed the character of the war and was, in effect, the beginning of the end for Hitler. Hitler's armies marched deep into the Soviet Union, but in the winter of 1941 and 42, the heroic effort of the Russian people stopped the German offensive at Leningrad and Moscow. A regrouped German army launched another offensive in the spring of 1942 aimed at Stalingrad. For months, the city was under siege, but the powerful Germans could not take the city. The epic Battle of Stalingrad was ended on January 31st, 1943, with the decisive defeat of Hitler's crack Sixth Army. With the invasion of the Soviet Union, our party's policy towards the war changed. It was no longer possible to limit the spread of the war. It was now a people's war aimed at the defeat of fascism. The bombing of Pearl Harbor ended any lingering hope that America could stay out of the war. Our slogans became everything for national unity and everything for victory. Interesting. By the time Hitler hurled his war machine against the Soviet Union, my health had improved and I was feeling as good as ever. Bell and I decided to move into LA proper and become more active in party affairs. Browder had sent a letter to the district secretary, Carl Winter, to the effect that the Spanish incident was not to be held against me and I was to be given an opportunity to make my contributions to the party. Pettis Perry was at the time head of Afro-American work in the district. Although I wasn't aware of it at the time, in hindsight, it's clear that under Browder's leadership, Ford had already set on a course which was to lead to the liquidation of the party's revolutionary position on the black national question. The party had already dissolved the Sharecroppers Union and under the pretext of building the United Front was slurring over the special demands of blacks in all its areas of work. The party's correct position for consolidating the United Front, the Declaration of National Unity under the slogans, everything for the war effort and everything for victory over worldwide fascist slavery, was, however, accompanied by a serious undermining of the party's leading role and its ideological strength. The tendency to subordinate the class struggle to Roosevelt's New Deal policy had manifested itself earlier in the liquidation of the party's factory units, shop papers, and trade union fractions. Now this tendency was revealing itself in distortions of the no strike pledge and hiding the face of the party. Bell brought this home to me in regards to her work in a war industry plant in Los Angeles. She was very dissatisfied and angry because, according to the line, she was supposed to remain in the background, promoting non-party people for union leadership. In many cases, and her plant was a good example, the no-strike pledge was interpreted to mean little, if any, struggle around working conditions or safety. The party demanded virtually no concessions from the factory owners in return for the guarantee that workers would not strike during the course of the war. So that sounds like making a deal with the devil. Of course you want to defeat fascism, but we're not going to give up on workers' rights. We're not going to give up on the workers' right to strike and organize. You get what I'm saying? Anyway, continuing here. A similar tendency of slurring over the special demands of blacks had begun to creep into the work. An example of this was the fact that despite the active role the party played in the struggle for the FEPC, an executive order to outlaw discrimination against blacks in war industries, it found itself tailing the NAACP and A. Philip Randolph when it came to organizing support for the measure. I saw these tendencies as deviations or individual mistakes, which would be corrected, not as symptoms of a developing opportunist line, a pattern of abdicating the leading role of the party. Somewhat divorced from the struggle going on in the party, Bell and I moved into an apartment on 42nd Street in Crocker in the Central Avenue district, the heart of Los Angeles' black ghetto. We immediately got to work, and in no time we were able to build up a party branch of about 50 blacks, some of the finest young people I had ever met. Most were from Oklahoma, Arkansas, Texas, and Louisiana, part of the first wave of migrations to the new war industries in and around Los Angeles. The branch secretary was one of the local people, with Bell as membership director and myself as education director. We held discussions and meetings on national and international problems, as well as questions confronting the community. Page 500. Every time you read 100 pages, take a shot. Page 500 of a 700-page book. Boy, it's been a long journey, a great journey, a fun journey. We take a shot for that every 100 pages. Anyway, we were elated with our success, but it was not shared by the district office downtown. Pettis Perry had tried to direct the Afro-American work from his office rather than establishing a base in the community. The work obviously suffered from this isolation, and he was jealous of our success. Our house was always open to comrades and quickly became a center for activity in the area. It wasn't long before we began hearing rumors which referred to Bell and myself as the Uptown Brain Trust and accused us of establishing a second center. Angered and fed up with those false charges, covert accusations, and innuendos, I decided to get a job. Although my health seemed excellent, I was wary of my heart condition. Basically saying all this gossiping and bickering and backbiting within the Communist Party is going to make his heart fall out. It's going to make him have another heart attack, and we don't want that. I wonder if at that time stents were invented. If you could just open up that artery by pushing open that thing with a stent. I don't know if stents were invented back then. Continuing. I went to the state rehabilitation office for a checkup to see if I was fit to work. To my surprise, I passed the examination with flying colors. The examining doctor told me my heart was in good condition and he saw no reason why I couldn't do anything I had done before. Encouraged, I asked if I could go to sea. Certainly, but I wouldn't advise you to do anything, to be anything like a stevedore, he said. Still, I was told I was unable to join the army. Interesting. What was I going to say? I wonder if he was smoking and eating like bacon and shit like that. Because, like, you know, Harry mentioned that he was smoking a cigarette one time and then a racist cop told him to put that cigarette out. You get what I'm saying? But he hasn't mentioned cigarettes or what his diet was. Once again, this is a political, autobiography more than a personal autobiography. So we're not getting that many personal details about his feelings or his habits or his quirks, stuff like that, just like his political active life. So continuing here. Signing up for the NMU. In June 1943, I enlisted as a seaman in the Merchant Marine at San Pedro, California, the port of Los Angeles. Just as millions around the world, I wanted to make some contribution to the fight against fascism. I knew the history of struggle of the National Maritime Union and had long been an admirer of the Militant Seamen's Union. The NMU was the largest of all the seamen's unions, reaching a membership of about 100,000 during the war. Its forerunner had been the Marine Workers Industrial Union, organized by the SIU, an AFL-dominated seamen's union. The TUUL union dissolved and sent its membership into the SIU. They later helped to lead the rank-and-file revolt against the bureaucratic leadership of the SIU. This revolt led to the founding of the NMU as a CIO union in 1936. Its history was marked by bloody strikes in 1936 and 37, in which several members were killed by thugs and police. Through this fierce struggle, and with the party's correct leadership, the NMU became one of the most militant, dedicated, and highly organized of all the CIO unions. The union was in the leadership of the anti-fascist movement both at home and abroad. It actively supported the anti-lynch bill, demanded full employment and a permanent FEPC. When Italian fascists invaded Ethiopia, NMU seamen refused to sail ships to Italy. Later, they refused to sail steel-laden ships and tankers for Japan. In the midst of very important union struggles, some 800 union members left their picket lines for Spain. Over 200 died in the attempt to defeat the fascist offensive and prevent a new world war. Okay, they were really militant. They were hella militant. The NMU seamen were known as worldwide emissaries of labor. They would contact local unions wherever they docked, offering assistance and support and often participating in labor marches and demonstrations. I gotta join a union, man. I gotta join a real militant union. What's a union I could join? I need to join an internationalist labor union. If anybody knows an internationalist labor union I could join, let me know. Anyway. So, as head of the party's Afro-American work, I had known many of the old-timers in the SIU and had worked with some of the men who helped to found the NMU. These included Al Lannon, Patty Whelan, Tom Ray, Johnny Rogan, Herschel Alexander, Roy Hudson, George Mink, Josh Lawrence, and Ferdinand Smith. The latter two were blacks and both were on the national board of the union. Smith became the national secretary, and Josh, a boatswain, became port agent for the Great Lakes. A few days after I enlisted, I signed on the Union Oil Company's tanker, La Placienta. I had no training besides as a waiter, so I chose the job of a crew messman, serving the crew at meals and cleaning up. I was the only black in the crew. We were bound for Pearl Harbor and Honolulu. Our tanker served as mothership for a dozen or so PT boats on their way to the Pacific War Zone, refueling them on their voyage across and relying on them to serve as our escort. These boats, patrol torpedo craft, were small, fast, and heavily armed. They carried a minimal crew of 3 officers and 11 men, armed with 4 torpedoes, 2 rocket launchers, 20mm anti-aircraft guns, 37mm cannon, and 50 caliber machine guns. PT boats were pound for pound the most heavily armed ships in the war. They were the most heavily armed ships in the war. In the months following Pearl Harbor, the Japanese met with almost fantastic success in the Pacific and South Asia. Despite the fact that their finest force, the Kwantung Army, was tied down in North and East China by the armies of Russia and China. By May 1942, most of the major islands in the South Pacific had fallen to Japan, either wholly or in part. Bangkok, Hong Kong, Java, Wake, Guam, and the Philippines were among the territories incorporated into Japan's co-prosperity empire. Australia was threatened with invasion from the north. Darwin, a northern port city, had already been attacked by the Imperial Air Force. When Burma fell to the Japanese, land supply routes to embattled China were effectively cut, and Japan had a base from which to launch an invasion of India. It wasn't until May 1942, at the Battle of the Coral Sea, that the Japanese met their first big setback. It was here that they were prevented from taking Port Moresby, Papua, and possibly invading Australia. In the next few months, they suffered major defeats at Midway and Guadalcanal. As we headed into the Pacific War Zone, 10 months after Guadalcanal, the Allies were preparing to launch their major offensive in the South Pacific. After 2 weeks at sea, we landed at Pearl Harbor. In December 1941, it had been the scene of the massive Japanese raid on the Pacific Fleet. Now, a year and a half later, the wreckage of Admiral Kimmel's once proud fleet was strewn over the harbor. Thousands of victims still lay in the hulls. I went ashore with some shipmates. We took a bus to Honolulu, a few miles away. I found wartime Honolulu pretty drab. The streets, buses, and amusement places were crowded with U.S. military and naval personnel. We went into a bar on Bishop Street in downtown Honolulu, and the white bartender proprietor refused to serve me. He apologetically said that he had nothing against blacks personally, but that there had been a bloody fight between black and white soldiers there just a week before. For that reason, he had decided not to serve blacks at all. Why not decide not to serve the racist whites? My white shipmate started to protest, but I said, "Oh, come on, don't bother. It wasn't worth the hassle." We just walked out and went to another bar. The Marines and the Navy, serving as shore patrol in Pearl Harbor at the time, were generally arrogant and belligerent toward us civilian seamen. They called us draft dodgers, dollar chasers, reds, and slackers. We had to swallow hard and just take it. If we fought back, we'd be thrown in the brig where we'd suffer even more abuse. We developed a real hatred for the Navy and the Marines. Their hostility and the racism the military had brought over with it tended to sour my impressions of Hawaii. I had no regrets when, in a couple of days, we were on our way back to San Pedro. We returned without escort, having left the PT boats at Pearl Harbor to supplement the Allies' Pacific Fleet. 2 weeks later, we left San Pedro again, retracing our last voyage back to Hawaii. By this time, the Allies were engaged in fierce battles to retake the Japanese-occupied territories of New Guinea and the Solomon Islands. In 6 months, as the result of these and later actions, Japan's Eastern Front would be wide open again. We brought with us another escort of PT boats. Again, we dropped the PT boats at Pearl Harbor, but this time we headed southwest to Pago Pago in the French possession about 800 miles east of Australia, which had formerly been a penal colony. The New Caledonians were Melanesians, big, fine-looking blacks with woolly hair. Okay, that's funny. My interest in anthropology had led me to read extensively about these Asian Negroes, and I was glad to have the opportunity to meet them firsthand. When I went to Indonesia, there was this brother that ran up to me because I was like deep off somewhere in like this like rural section of Jakarta, and this was when I was a really practicing Muslim, so I was praying at the mosques all the time and stuff like that. And after praying, I believe Isha prayer, the last final prayer of the day, this brother comes running up to me and he starts speaking this language I don't understand. And he looks black like me. You know what I mean? The brother looked black like me, big broad nose, big lips, everything like that. He starts speaking to me in like one of the Indonesian languages. I didn't understand him. And then he switches to English and he's like, are you from Java or something like that? Because I believe in Indonesia, there's a section called Java or something like that. I forgot the name. But the people there look black as hell. Like black, like us. You get what I'm saying? And that was my first time interacting with somebody like that. And I'll never forget that. We had a very brotherly bonding moment. You get what I'm saying? Just off of the strength of us looking the same. You know what I mean? I'll never forget that. Meeting a black person from Asia who is not from Africa and, you know, has not had lineage from Africa for like thousands of years. I'll never forget that moment. And this is, once again, it's so cool that so many moments in Harry Haywood's life, you know, mimic or parallel my own. Because that is an experience. If you're a black person in America or a black person anywhere and you have not been to Southeast Asia, take some time and go to Java and meet the black folks that are already there. It's pretty mind-blowing when you actually see them. We know they exist. You know what I mean? We know the Melanesians exist. It's just seeing them in person is just trippy for some reason. I don't know. I'm going to continue. After about 10 days there, discharging our fuel and refueling some naval craft coming in from the Solomons, we finally sailed out past the coral reefs and we were on our way home. At the time, merchant ships were more heavily armed than they had been earlier in the war. Our tanker mounted 2 3-inch cannons fore and aft and several 20mm rapid-fire Swiss anti-aircraft guns. On our ship, these guns were manned by a Navy gun crew of 18 men commanded by a lieutenant junior grade. We merchant seamen performed a vital support role for the armed guard detachment. I served as assistant leader on one of the anti-aircraft guns. In the early morning, about 2 days out of Noumea, a general alarm was sounded. An unidentified ship had been sighted on the horizon off the port bow. We all rushed to our battle stations and waited. In wartime, we had to maintain radio silence to avoid disclosing our position. We waited for the ship to come close enough to identify it. We knew we wouldn't have a chance against a Japanese warship. It would have blown us out of the water. We were all relieved when the alarm was finally called off. The vessel had been identified as the U.S. troop ship West Point. Interesting. False alarm. Almost did some friendly fire. Well, we wouldn't want to do that. Kill some American servicemen now. We wouldn't want to do that. Hey, Simon, what country would the snow bunnies love me the most? The front room, Black P. What? The front room over Black P. What is Black P? What is Black P? I don't know what you mean by that. What country would the snow bunnies love you the most, Nelson? I think they would love you in Portugal. Don't you get plenty of snow bunnies? Doesn't it snow in Portugal? Don't you get don't you get cold participation in Lisbon? I don't know. If they don't work in Portugal, try Spain. Try Spain. I don't know where the snow bunnies will love you most. What you need to do, though, Nelson, is go out to Southeast Asia, to Java, Melanesia, and get one of those big booty Javanese girls. Yeah, big booty Javanese girls. Black as hell with blonde curly hair. They exist. It's a mind trip. It's a mind trip. I'm going to continue here. The Black Panthers. The front room over Black Panthers. I don't know what you mean by that. Nelson, don't derail this. We're trying to wrap up this book. Continuing here. Back home, after a couple of weeks in Los Angeles, we got the news that a big troop ship was crewing up in San Pedro. It was the Uruguay, a former luxury liner on the New York-Buenos Aires run that had been leased to the military by Moore McCormick Lines. She had now been converted into a troop ship and had been carrying troops from the East Coast to Oran and other ports in North Africa. She had come through the Panama Canal and around to the West Coast. Scuttlebutt had it that she was now to transport troops to the Pacific War Zone. When they got the news that she was being transferred to the Pacific, half the original crew had gotten off in New York. She made the New York to San Pedro run with only half of her 450-man crew. She was carrying no troops at the time, so it posed no big problem. San Pedro was mainly a freighter and a tanker port, supplying crews of between 40 and 60. The NMU local was hard put for men to fill out the Uruguay's large crew and for the new crew ratings required for a large troop transport. The NMU local was hard put for men to fill out the Uruguay's large crew and for the new crew ratings required for a large troop transport. The local had to send to San Francisco to help fill out the crew. The NMU port agent in San Pedro at the time was Oliver Boutte, a progressive-minded black from New Orleans. The chief union patrolman, the #1 port union official under the port agent, was Neil Crow, a tough, experienced seaman and a well-respected communist. The union was determined to put together the best possible crew for the Uruguay and started by lining up a solid nucleus of good union seamen. One reason for the special effort was the rumors of racketeering aboard the Uruguay. It was a good opportunity to clean up the ship. Racketeering on board ships, mainly gambling and selling illegal liquor to troops, was a crucial issue for the National Maritime Union. It was a matter of principle. The honor of the Union was at stake. In spite of the NMU's 100% backing of the war effort, merchant seamen were often the target of the kind of slanderous remarks I have already mentioned. Shipboard racketeering played into these slanders. Racketeering also prevented the Union from handling legitimate beefs about ship conditions. It divided the crew against itself and made it difficult to wage effective struggles to improve intolerable conditions, crowded and inadequately ventilated quarters, unsanitary heads, poor food, and arbitrary disciplinary treatment from officers. Shipboard racketeers were strongly anti-union, undoubtedly often the result of deals made with the officers to look the other way from the rackets. Having never worked on a big ship, I was at the time only dimly aware of these problems and what they meant for the Union. All right, going to the Nelson Moreno says, I want to try Exotic Women, that Marvel movie, Black Panther. You know what? Acty and I should review Black Panther. And The Front Room is a good movie. The Front Room is actually a good movie. It's a very memorable movie. Shout out to Solange. Shout out to the actress that played Solange in The Front Room. If you want to try Exotic Women, go to Melanesia. I want Nelson Moreno, I want you to, break out of the white man's chains, leave Portugal, and move to Melanesia. Get a big booty Melanesian. Type in Melanesian. Type in Melanesian woman on Google, and you will be impressed. Go in here. We're going to continue. We're going to wrap up, what is this, chapter 19? We're going to wrap up chapter 19. Or is this chapter 20? I'm sorry. Yes, we're wrapping up chapter 19 pretty soon. We're going to be reading until page 429. Reading until page 429. So we have quite a few pages to go. So let's continue here. So when the day arrived to crew up the Uruguay, the hiring hall was crowded. I recognized some familiar faces. Red Herrick was there, a veteran communist seaman and artist who had made the maiden voyage on the Booker T. Washington. The Washington was the first merchant ship to be commanded by a black captain, Hugh Mulzac. Red was a fireman on the ship. I was surprised to see Herschel Alexander, a well-known black communist leader from Los Angeles who had never sailed before. I stood in the crowded Union Hall reading the long list of ratings that had to be filled. There were openings for cooks, bakers, waiters, pantrymen, utility men, and others in the steward's department. I knew my skills were limited, but I had no desire to take another messman job. Neil Crow approached me and said, "We really want to put you on that ship, Harry. Take the chief pantryman's job," he told me. I hesitated, wondering why the job was posted when the third and fourth pantryman jobs were not. Why hadn't anyone from the old crew wanted to move up to chief pantryman? I didn't know if I was qualified. The job would put me in charge of about 10 men responsible for preparing salads and hors d'oeuvres, setting up and serving at steam tables, and making beverages, coffee, tea, and desserts for 400 to 500 officers. Several friends of mine standing nearby also urged me to take the job. A young man whom I had just met in the hall, Herbert Jeffrey, said, "I'll support you, Harry. I'll throw in my card for first pantryman." With the support of with the promise of their support, I agreed. When the dispatcher called out Chief Pantryman, I stepped forward and threw in my card. No one else applied. There was no contest. I felt uneasy all over again, but I had the job. Upon boarding the ship, my ability to perform the chief pantryman's job was immediately challenged by the chef. He was an Argentinian, an old chef from the Uruguay's days as a luxury liner, and a rabid white chauvinist, basically a white supremacist. When he saw me, he scowled. "So you're the chief pantryman?" I said I was. "We'll make me up 4 gallons of French dressing, 4 gallons of Thousand Island, 4 gallons of Russian dressing, a gallon of tartar sauce, and 4 gallons of mayonnaise." It was clearly a challenge to my ability, especially making mayonnaise from scratch. I was taken aback because I'd never done it before. I sought out Jeffries, who had promised to back me up, but he didn't know how to make a mayonnaise either. Fortunately, the second pantryman, a Swede, stepped in and saved the day. I passed the chef's test to his great disappointment and had no more problems of this type during the voyage. We left San Pedro on November 9th, 1943, bound for the South Pacific and eventually Bombay, India. Approximately 5,000 troops were on board. In contrast to the La Placentia, a large portion of Uruguay's crew was black, especially in the steward's department. On the first day out, we organized a union ship committee which consisted of 1 delegate and an alternate delegate from each department, deck, engine, and steward. A meeting of the crew was called and Red Herrick was elected ship chairman. The meeting was general. A statement of union principles was made. The need for a clean ship emphasized, and every man urged to do his job. There was no controversy, and it was uneventful. 2 or 3 days out, however, racketeering became the issue. My 3rd and 4th pantrymen were arrested by the ship military police and charged with selling liquor to the soldiers. The military police had raided their bunk rooms and found the bulkheads packed with cases of liquor, a virtual warehouse of smuggled booze. How did they get all that contraband aboard? I wondered. Obviously, these men had connections with shoreside gangsters. They were put in the brig for the remainder of the 3-month voyage. Now it was clear to me why these men had not put in for the chief pantryman's job. They didn't need the extra pay and didn't want the extra responsibility. But this was not all. The ship was swarming with a number of rackets. There was a cigarette racket controlled by a storeman. He smuggled aboard entire cases of cigarettes and, when we reached Bombay, sold them at fantastic profits. But the greatest of all the rackets was the nightly crap and poker games. They were run by 2 glory hole crew quarters stewards, the lowest rating on the ship. The stewards were big-time professional gamblers and had the entire operation well organized. They were surrounded by toadies and sycophants who covered their jobs for them and even served them special food and the best scotch while they lay around all day in their bunks. These men and their circle of cronies were corrupting a significant section of the crew and represented the main obstacle to any united action to improve conditions on the ship. In ship meetings, they always were the greatest patriots and red-baited the Union, warning against communists that were out to disrupt the ship. We struggled against these phonies during the entire 3-month voyage, and after several tense incidents, were finally able to isolate them. Shout out to Kamal in the chat, my brother Kamal, big comrade Kamal, the lieutenant of the Defense from Crackerdom League. Give your commission to him, and he will get you kitted out to join the Defense from Crackerdom League. Let's continue here. Our first port of call was Hobart, Tasmania, an island southeast of Australia on the Tasman Sea. A few days before arriving, we picked up 2 Army transports which continued sailing with us all the way to Bombay. Our stay was short, only 24 hours, but a welcome break after the long, lonely Pacific crossing. Hobart, a very pleasant town, was a resort and vacation area for Australians. Leaving Hobart, we stood for Fremantle, the port of Perth on the west coast of Australia, sailing the rough seas of the Great Australian Bight. In Perth, I had my first impressions of Australia. It seemed a white man's country to me then. I never saw any of the native inhabitants, but strangely I felt no antagonism. On the contrary, everyone was very friendly toward us black seamen. We were aware of the immigration bar against Asians and blacks, which was rigidly enforced. When asked about this, the Aussies assured us it wasn't a racist law. It's got nothing to do with you guys, and certainly we're friendly with the Chinese. I thought to myself, well, they should be, for the Chinese were a major factor in preventing a Japanese fascist invasion of Australia by pinning down Japan's armies in North China. They told us it's a law brought in by the Labour government to prevent Australian capitalists from importing coolie labor and undercutting the white Australian workers. The irony of this explanation didn't even occur to the Australians. They didn't even see that it was racist. We found ourselves warmly greeted as we went sightseeing through the city of Perth. Several members of an Australian artillery regiment invited us to bring all our friends and come to a dance that night at their barracks just outside of Fremantle. We turned out in large numbers and were waltzing in Matildas all night long. It was a great party and didn't break up until nearly daylight. When we sailed several days later, we bid them all goodbye. We were glad to see the 2 Dutch cruisers that would escort us to Bombay. We felt that these were particularly hostile waters since much of the territory on the coast of the Bay of Bengal was occupied by the Japanese, as were the Andaman Islands, some 1,800 miles east of India. Even now, as we sailed through the Indian Ocean with our cargo of U.S. troops bound for Bombay, the Japanese were massing their forces in Burma preparatory to invading eastern India. 6 weeks out of San Pedro, we docked in Bombay. I wanted to find the Communist Party headquarters to see if it would be possible to meet with some of the Indian comrades I had known at Kutfa. This proved to be a simple task. I asked a longshoreman who gave me directions to the party headquarters. Several comrades, Herschel Alexander, Red Herrick, and I, went downtown and found the party headquarters. It was an impressive 4 or 5-story building on a main street, a red flag with hammer and sickle flying from its roof. Walking in, we identified ourselves to the first person we saw, a young man who turned out to be a member of the Central Committee of the Indian Party. I explained that we were American communists and that I was interested in seeing some of the Indians I had known in Moscow. I didn't know their real names, but I gave the young man several descriptions. He asked what years I had been in Moscow. When I said 1926, 1930, his face showed real interest. Well, he said, I think something can be arranged. Why don't you and your friends come back here at 6 o'clock for dinner? Herschel, myself, and several others came back that evening and went upstairs. We took our shoes off in the hall, as was the custom, and entered in our stocking feet. There they were, my old friends from Moscow. Nada, a beautiful Indian woman, rushed to embrace me. There was Sakharov, my old roommate and close friend, and one of the founders of the Indian Communist Party. He told me he was now in the Central Committee and was party representative to the National Indian Congress for the Bombay districts. There was also Patel, who had toured the United States before the war as a representative of Indian students. His tour had been sponsored by the American Youth Congress. He was now Communist Party district organizer from Bombay. There were also several of the old Sikhs who grabbed me. Harry, my friend sat us down and we all ate and swapped tales about old times and about the political situation in our respective countries. Nada was now president of the Bombay chapter of the Friends of the Soviet Union. Before, she had been a nationally known communist youth leader. She invited us to come visit a group at the University of Bombay. The next day, we met with a bunch of young students there and talked politics over cups of Indian tea. Our troops disembarked at Bombay, and after about 6 days, we pulled out of the harbor with a very light load, a handful of passengers, a few military hospital patients, and some diplomatic types. We headed for Cape Town, sailing down through the Indian Ocean, ever watchful for Japanese submarines, which had been reported off Madagascar. As we neared Cape Town, a notice appeared on the ship's bulletin board, something to the effect that the people of South Africa have certain customs and laws as to race. While they are not ours, we should all respect them. Remember, we are in their country and don't start any trouble. A bunch of us, about half black and half white, got off the ship together and went straight to a dockside bar. No sooner did we get in than the bartender started yelling, "Now wait a minute, fellas. The blacks over here and the whites over there." This man traveled a lot. India, South Africa, Russia, Spain, France, Germany, man, the Crimea. This brother traveled a lot. This is real passport bro shit. Not just dropping dick off in little Filipinos. This is real passport bro shit. Man was traveling. Man was traveling at a time when most black folks couldn't even leave their block. For real. Outside in South Africa. Front face with apartheid. Got to witness apartheid. That's crazy. Anyway. Some of our white shipmates started to protest, but we blacks said, "What the hell? We want a drink, man. We know this is South Africa. Damn it, you know we can't fight this thing now. Let's get a drink." We settled for salutes across the bar. I went up to the 6th District, Cape Town's black ghetto, with some of my black shipmates. I was never so depressed in my life. The oppression of the people was complete. I'd seen nothing like it, even in the darkest Mississippi. There, blacks at least had some kind of cultural institutions, churches, lodges, and so forth. Here they had nothing. Man them went to South Africa and saw that the blacks in the shanty towns and the Bantustans had nothing, not even a church, not a Masonic lodge, nothing. They had been forced from the land and pushed into oppressive native reserves. These reserves, in turn, served as labor reservoirs for the city, where blacks were crowded into ghettos and their tribal structures and institutions completely destroyed. Their culture had been stolen from them. Whites were warned not to go into the area after dark, as a number of whites had been murdered there. This seemed like a kind of spontaneous rebellion to me. As I walked down the street, I heard 2 blacks speaking in a strange and beautiful language. I stopped and asked them what it was. They answered in perfect English that it was Xhosa, their tribal language. It sounded almost musical to me. Black downtown, I went into a restaurant for natives, for the white owner refused to serve me. "But I'm black," I protested. "Yeah, but you're not one of ours." Crazy, the tribalism. Okay. Kamal says, "I was thinking that the man is seasoned like Lawry's." I'm telling you, I'm surprised. Every time he pops up in a location I didn't expect. I did not expect for him to go to like apartheid South Africa, peak apartheid. This is crazy. This is one of the best travel books for a black person to read, for real, because this man witnessed some things when black folks could not travel. Remember, Harry Haywood was born of slaves. His parents were literal slaves, and here he is traveling the world, visiting so many places at a time when black faces were not seen. Anyway, yeah, I made my way to the Communist Party headquarters and was surprised to find that, like in Bombay, it was located on a main street downtown. There was a young white woman at the office to whom I introduced myself. She seemed to recognize my name. She was the wife of an Indian member of the Central Committee. She said, "It's so unfortunate that you came through at this particular time. All the Central Committee people are in Joburg. There's a big plenum going on this weekend. I'm sure my husband and others would have liked to have met you." I asked about some of these South Africans I had known in Moscow. She said that Bunting had died and that Rue was no longer in the party, but still friendly. "What's this I hear about the party in America?" she asked. I said that I didn't know what she meant. "Well, it came over the radio last night that your party is dissolving itself." My God. This all came as a great surprise and shock to me. It was hard to believe. I knew there had been some backsliding and a general move to the right, but dissolve the party? I wonder if there could have been some misunderstanding. Before we boarded the ship, we all met at the USO by the docks. This was the first time since we had come ashore that black and white shipmates had been able to get together. We made the most of it, drinking beer and swapping stories. Herb Jeffries, a very light-skinned black man with blondish hair and blue eyes, was a target of a lot of kidding. Herb's brother, Howard, was a nationally known singer with the Duke Ellington Band. When he had split up on leaving the dockside bar, Herb had no choice but to go with the whites. Now we had some fun at his expense. "You goddamn white son of a bitch, you ratted on us. You left your own race." That's funny. "You ran out on us at the docks, man. I don't think we'll let you back in the race," said Herschel. Herb was embarrassed and kind of felt bad. "What was I gonna do, man?" he asked. "They wouldn't serve me with you guys." Herschel winked at me and we kept putting poor Herb on for some time. What he what he said was true though. In South Africa, he couldn't pass for black. The struggle against the racketeers had been going on since we left San Pedro, and by the time we left Cape Town, we had them pretty well isolated. We had the goods on them, and they knew it. We had built up a core of about 25 guys who played a leading role in the fight for better conditions and against these crooks. Things were tense though. One evening I was on deck, leaning on the rail when Red came up from the engine room. "Harry," he said, "be careful about getting too near that rail at night. We're in the middle of a hell of a fight, and those bastards would love to dump you over." The ship's committee met to draw up charges against the racketeers. 2 or 3 of them were direct accusations. Clearly, we said, the racketeers were literally robbing the soldiers with their fixed games. They were obstructing the fight for better conditions on board by setting up shipmates against each other. And finally, they were besmirching the name of the Union. As we headed up the South Atlantic, we called a general meeting to present the charges. A group of us got together beforehand to talk over the issues. Red Herrick, the ship chairman, was there, as was Herschel Alexander. Herschel was short, not more than 5 feet 4 inches, with broad shoulders and a big roaring voice. He'd been one of the party's finest orators. Red said, "After all these points are made, I want you to sum it up, Herschel. Really stir the crew up. Then, when you're through, I'll call for a vote right away." Red chaired the meeting and read the charges. Everything had a say, and most everyone spoke against the racketeers. As I recall, they weren't there, but their toadies did the red baiting for them. The discussion went on for a considerable time. Finally, Red recognized Herschel, and that clinched it. The crew confirmed the charges and referred the crooks to a shoreside committee of the Union for trial. Crossing the Caribbean, we were anticipating the time when we'd return to San Pedro and get rid of these parasites. This would be no problem since San Pedro was a small port and Union grievance was a small port. This would be no problem since San Pedro was a small port and Union grievances could be processed quickly. We thought we had everything sewn up. Then one night, while several of us were standing on deck, one old seaman noticed, "We're not sailing through any damn Panama Canal. We're too damn far. Look at those lights. There's St. Thomas and that's Puerto Rico. We're going to New York, man." As the word spread, the crooks started getting cocky again. They knew the ropes in New York and stood a better chance of stalling things in such a large port. A few days later, the ship docked at the military base on Staten Island. Normally, crews were paid off at the end of a voyage with a Union patrolman present who was able to handle grievances. But the military authorities would not allow our patrolmen aboard ship. The crew was paid off outside the base, and everyone who had been active in our Union caucus was fired for inefficiency. By the time we could get through the red tape to raise the issues, the Uruguay was offshore, on its way to Oran, Algeria. The racketeers sailed with the ship while we were left in New York. Another tragedy, man. These people were, selling cigarettes and alcohol and running illegal gambling on the ship. They got the whole Union in trouble. Maybe these guys got underpaid, and then they lost their jobs because these dickheads were, doing something illegal on the ship. You get what I'm saying? Once again, another tragedy, or how can I say, bittersweet drama, or melodrama in Harry Haywood's life. Continuing, we put up at the Broadway Central Hotel and stayed there a couple of weeks. Nothing could be done about our grievances. Most of the guys went back to San Pedro. The shipping administration gave first-class fare back to your home port. I decided to stay in New York and take advantage of the Union's program for members to upgrade their skills as cooks and bakers. I spent a month at Manual Arts High School on 13th Street near 7th Avenue learning the rudiments of baking. While I was in New York, I went to see Bill Foster and check on what I heard in South Africa about the party being dissolved. I went up to the 9th floor of the party headquarters on East 13th Street. There was Foster, alone in his office, his feet on his desk, his hat pulled down his eyes. He appeared to be in deep thought. "Hello, Harry. I hear you're a seaman now," he said. I told him I'd just returned from an around-the-world voyage, and we talked a while about the sea. Foster had years before been a sailor himself. Finally, I told him what I heard in South Africa about the party being dissolved. Yes, he said, that is what Browder has in mind. When I asked what he planned to do about it, he said, let's take a walk. The walls have ears. As we walked down University Place towards Washington Square, Foster explained how he saw Browder's line. It's a rightist line, I recall him saying, one that just tails behind the bourgeoisie. He thinks they will voluntarily stick to the Tehran agreements. Browder is pushing the line that the American capitalists, for their own best interests, will continue the unity of the Big Three, the U.S., the USSR, and Great Britain, after the war is over. He wants us to continue the no-strike pledge and is saying that there won't be any more economic crises or wars or class conflicts, only peace and prosperity. He's crazy. Foster told me how Browder was then proposing to change the party into an association, for this was in line with his view that the two-party system is adequate. Was Browder compromised? Was he paid by the CIA? What it all came down to is that he not only wanted to dissolve the party, he wanted to liquidate Marxism. Again, I asked Foster what he was planning to do. I remember that his greatest concern was to avoid a split in the party in the middle of a war. But I asked, isn't Browder going to dissolve the party in the middle of the war? There certainly is an opposition. Why not lead it? He hedged, saying Browder was looking for the chance to expel him. By this time, he had returned to the party headquarters. By this time, we had returned to the party headquarters. We agreed to keep in touch. What I did not know then was that Foster had written a letter to the National Committee opposing Browder's line. This letter was read at the political committee a few days before our conversation on February 8, 1944, and was opposed by every other committee member except Sam Darcy of Pennsylvania. Further, it had been made clear at the time that Foster would be expelled if he attempted to take the struggle against Browder to the rank and file. This was a difficult time for me. I knew from discussions with others, especially Seaman, that they were fairly widespread opposition to Browder's position, but no one was sure what to do. The opposition existed, but it had no leadership. Browder was systematically violating democratic centralism by stifling any thorough discussion of his new policies. Thus, the opposition in various parts of the country remained isolated from each other. I found myself feeling very much like many others. Browder's business was really bad, but it was being steamrolled through. At the time, it seemed that the only thing that could be done was to bide our time, waiting for events to expose Browder's opportunism. Browder might have possibly been the worst thing that could have ever happened to the Communist Party. The worst possible thing that could have happened to the left was Browder, basically saying like, yo, we're not going to be a Marxist-Leninist party. We're just basically going to support the Democrats or whatever central left liberal bourgeoisie party is in power, right? Anyway, life aboard the Erickson. Late in March 1944, I signed on as assistant baker on the John Erickson for the first of 4 voyages on that ship. This was the period of preparation for the long-awaited Second Front in the European War. This had been deliberately delayed by Britain and the U.S. since 1917. The dominant theme in the relations between imperialist countries and the Soviet Union had been the former's desire to crush the world's first socialist state. The earliest manifestation of this had been their pouring over 900,000 troops into the Soviet Union in the early 20s to aid the White armies in the Civil War. When the Red Army proved indomitable, their policy took the form of economic embargoes and diplomatic boycotts. During the period of the Third Reich, the British, French, and American governments saw their chance to move against the Soviets through a third party. Thus, when Nazi Germany rose to become a major power, the imperialist powers followed a policy of appeasement and financial support, hoping to induce the Germans to turn eastward. The U.S., Britain, and France refused to take action against Germany's illegal remilitarization, its reoccupation of the Rhineland, its support of the fascist invasion of Ethiopia and China, and its direct intervention in Spain. The day after Hitler attacked the Soviet Union, this policy was articulated by then-Senator Harry Truman, who said, "If we see that Germany is winning, we ought to help Russia. And if Russia is winning, we ought to help Germany." Even when circumstances forced Britain, France, and the United States to ally themselves with the Soviet Union against the Axis powers, this policy continued. The most striking example of this was their refusal to open up the Second Front in Europe until 3 years after the Nazi invasion of Russia. The Soviets thus bore the main brunt of the anti-fascist fight, and the number killed, perhaps 18 million, was 27 times the total US and English deaths combined. By the time the Second Front was finally opened, the Red Army had already broken the back of Hitler's Wehrmacht at Moscow, Leningrad, and Stalingrad, and had crossed into Poland on its way to Berlin. The decision to land troops at Normandy was prompted as much by the British and American imperialist desire to prevent a Soviet sweep to the Atlantic as by their desire to shorten the war. It is, in fact, estimated that their delay in opening the Second Front prolonged the war by a full year. The Eriksson was formerly a Swedish luxury liner, now leased to the U.S. as a troop ship. She usually carried about 5,000 troops on her trips from New York to Liverpool. We would go in on a big convoy with a number of other troop ships and a number of escort vessels. The Allies by that time were building up for the opening of the Second Front and the invasion of Normandy, which was to take place in June of that year. It took us about a month to make the round trip. We'd drop the troops in Liverpool and then sail up to Scotland. There were 4 or 5 bakers and assistants in the Eriksson's baking department. The chief baker was a Swede named Vidal. He had been chief baker on the Eriksson when it was a luxury liner. He was a fine pastry chef, and we baked bread for the whole ship, pastry for the officers. Vidal outdid himself, making chocolate eclairs, Bismarcks, and Danish pastry. I loved the work, and by the time I got off the ship, I could make all kinds of pastries. Vidal was a good teacher, but he was a little sore that all the young guys were learning so fast. He was from the old school and had been apprenticed to a baker at the age of 12. He used to tell us how the chief baker would stride in with his head up in the air, and all the boys would greet him. "Good morning, Herr Chef Baker." I had to wash pans for a year before they'd even let me touch the dough, he would tell us. And now you guys come on here and expect to be bakers in a few months? I also met Jake, the bread baker, Rabinowitz on the Eriksson. He was a specialist in sourdough bread. He'd come up the gangplank with a little satchel, and all the old bakers would say, "Here comes Jake with that same old mother dough that he's had for 25 years. After we dropped the troops off, we had a chance to see Liverpool. It was an old port city which had suffered heavily from Hitler's Blitz, and large sections of the city lay in ruins. The pubs were fascinating places. They were real social centers where people spent the evening drinking beer and playing darts. The British were polite, and someone would always come up to my table and strike up a conversation. Perhaps because I was black, they would often raise criticisms of Americans, which they didn't mention to my white shipmates. They couldn't stand the way some Americans were always boasting and carrying on about American superiority. The British were proud too, but in a quiet way. Y'all need to read that book, Black and British, by David Olusoga. Read that book, Black and British, by David Olusoga. Fascinating book. Anyway, what's wrong with the Yanks? I'd ask when the subject came up. "They're overpaid, oversexed, and over here," came the reply. The German counteroffensive at the Battle of the Bulge was going on, and the British followed it carefully. "The Yanks are getting it now," they'd say. "Americans were so critical of our fighting, but they're finding out it's not so easy. It's no easy road. They're finding out it's not an easy road fighting the Nazis." When we'd leave Liverpool, we'd go up to Glasgow, Scotland, and pick up German prisoners and wounded. It was easier to take them back to the U.S. than to ship food over to them. As our ship pulled out of Gourock, Glasgow's port, the German prisoners would be assembled on the deck. We'd ask, "Are there any bakers here?" Inevitably, some would step forward because they knew they'd get better food if they worked in the kitchen. So on the return voyages, we ships bakers could take it easy. There were a lot of good fellows in our crew, but we were slow getting the ship organized. After my first voyage, I got in touch with Al Lannon, the party's waterfront organizer and member of the Central Committee. I asked about the possibility of getting 1 or 2 good party men aboard to help us make the Eriksson a model Union ship. "Who's in port here?" I asked Al. "I'll tell you just the guy you need. It's Harry Rubin. He has a kind of puritanical streak. After a while, he may do something or other and get himself isolated from the rest of the crew. You can use him for a couple of voyages, though. Reuben was a little fellow who walked with a limp as a result of being wounded in Spain. He signed on as a wiper in the engine room, the lowest job there. Sure enough, he helped whip the whole thing together in short order. In no time at all, we had the whole ship tightly organized. The committees and delegates in all the departments were functioning well. The crew was up to standard. We presented and won many grievances and improved the food and living conditions. There were classes for the crew on Union history and improving technical skills. As educational director, I taught a course on the nature of fascism. I got to join a union, and it kind of would be cool to work on a ship, maybe for like a summer or so. I don't know, it's a summer gig. Anyway, a couple of voyages later, there was an incident which proved Lannon's cautions about Reuben to be correct. Reuben charged 2 Puerto Rican crew members with selling a couple pints of liquor to 2 of the soldiers on board. The Union had a strict policy on this sort of racketeering, but the attitude of most of the crew was, we don't want to press this too hard. It's just a small case. Just tell them they can't do it anymore. There were no big racketeers aboard, but Reuben took a hard line. He insisted that charges be brought against them and that they stand trial before the Union Port Committee in New York. There was a division on the ship's committee, and many of us thought we should be a little flexible in this situation. But in the end, we followed Reuben's lead. The incident made for hard feeling among the crew and divided the ship, which we had worked so hard to organize. The union meeting on board, which we called to discuss the charges, was very heated. The defendants claimed the charges were an example of discrimination against Puerto Ricans. There were about 50 Puerto Ricans in the crew and about the same number of blacks. The defendants were able to line most of them up on their side. In truth, Puerto Ricans and blacks had some real grievances. They were mostly in the steward's department, and many lived way down in the glory hole, the worst section of the ship. Also, the evidence against the defendants was flimsy and consisted of 2 affidavits signed by 2 soldiers long gone from the ship. The crew was split down the middle, and when the vote was called as to whether the defendants should be charged and stand trial in New York, about 60% voted no. I wonder why people couldn't drink on ships. That just sounds like necessary just to keep people like, kind of chill and happy. You know what I mean? Cigarettes and a beer. I understand people not being drunk during working hours, but if it's not your shift, why not have like a swig of whiskey and a cigarette? I don't know. Anyway, in later voyages, we were able to unite the crew under our leadership again. Reuben, however, didn't sign on again because he, more than any of us, had isolated himself from the rest of the crew. I quit the Erickson in early September 1944. I planned to return to Los Angeles, but I had followed the Soviet counteroffensive with intense interest. The victories at Stalingrad and Leningrad and in the Crimea had pushed the Germans back beyond the border. Thus, I was determined to make the Murmansk run before I returned to the West Coast. I was determined to make the Murmansk run, meaning he's going to, be on the boat sailing across Murmansk, which I believe is the north of Russia. Anyway, I went down to the Union Hall on West 17th Street. No one told where a ship was bound during the war, but when the dispatcher called out, "Here's that cold run. Get your heavy underwear." Heavy underwear. You think Russians have to wear like 3 pairs of underwear, 4 pairs of underwear during winter? That's crazy. Or is that just an expression? Get your heavy underwear on. Everyone knew what that meant. I didn't know what it meant. Let me know. I wanted to sign on as second cook and baker, but that job was already taken. The only rating I could take was crew messman, so I threw in my card. The ship was the Winfred L. Smith, docked in Jersey. I packed my bag, being sure to include my Russian grammar book and dictionary, and a Russian edition of Tolstoy's War and Peace, so that I could bone up on my once fluent knowledge of Russian. I then hurried to New Jersey and signed on. We sailed on September 26, 1944 for Halifax, Nova Scotia, where the convoy assembled. We had a heavy escort of destroyers, cruisers, and corvettes as we headed for Glasgow, Scotland. After docking at Gourock on the Clyde, we headed north along the Scottish coast to Loch Ewe, where we reassembled for the last leg of the Murmansk run. a British commodore took over command of the convoy, calling a conference of captains to explain the procedures and routes for making the dangerous run through the Norwegian Sea, around the North Cape to the Kola Inlet and Murmansk. Leaving Loch Ewe, we were a formidable convoy of about 30 ships in all. Our escort vessels included frigates, destroyers, corvettes, and baby aircraft carriers, escort carriers. The cargo ships were all armed. Our Liberty ship had, in addition to the normal crew of 40 men, a Navy gun crew of 18, which manned the two 3-inch 50 caliber cannons, several 20mm Oerlikon anti-aircraft guns, and lighter caliber machine guns. This sounds like Star Wars. These ships sound like they're, traveling from Tatooine to Naboo. I mean, it's crazy. Anyway, the convoy, we understood, was also given distant cover by a British battleship and cruiser on the home fleet, which lay just out of sight. Further protection was afforded by the winter solstice, which provided virtually 24 hours of darkness. The crew's quarters were midship and portholes looking out on the aft deck cargo. There were several narrow gauge train engines lashed to the deck. Heading northeast, we entered the Norwegian Sea, one of the world's stormiest seas. It didn't take much imagination to visualize the engines breaking loose and crashing through our bunks. It certainly didn't make for a relaxed voyage. But then neither did the Germans. German subpacks hounded us throughout the voyage. A reminder of their presence was the constant dropping of depth charges which shook everything and everyone on ship as the bulkheads quivered and the deck plates rattled. But we were lucky. It was later revealed that no less than 18 U-boats were lying in ambush for our convoy. When we arrived in Murmansk, we learned that only one escort frigate had been damaged by a torpedo. Our convoy was routed unusually close to the Norwegian coast, probably not more than 25 miles offshore. The normal route took convoys far from German-occupied Norway. It was understood that we were attempting to lure the battleship von Tirpitz out of the fjords. A year before, our sister ship, the Scharnhorst, had slipped out to attack a similar convoy, and after a long chase, was sunk by the British Navy. By this time, the von Tirpitz did not accept the challenge and remained in the fjord. Off North Cape, we were attacked by a formation of 16 German torpedo bombers. General alarm was sounded. I rushed to my position as assistant loader on the Oerlikon gun, life jacket slung around my neck, and rubber suit under my arm. The engagement lasted only a few minutes. Heavy fire from our entire convoy quickly brought down 3 planes and drove the others off. They did manage to drop a few torpedoes, but they went astray, doing no damage. This is high stakes. This is scary as hell. I could not imagine dying on a ship like near the North Pole. This is crazy. Torpedoes under the boat. I would have pissed myself, low key. I would have been scared as hell. Anyway, we finally dropped anchor in the Kola Inlet in early November. This brother traveled to the North Pole. This is true passport. This is true passport shit. The brother went from South Africa, India, Russia, Crimea. I think he also said he spent some time in Georgia and Turkey. Brother went everywhere and is now in the North Pole. Can this story get any more trippy? The brother went to the North Pole, man. He went to the North Pole. This is crazy. Anyway, we finally dropped anchor in the Kola Inlet in early November. Half of our convoy, including our ship, unloaded our cargo in Murmansk. The remaining ship sailed across the White Sea and onto Archangel. Our first sight of Murmansk was the badly battered dock and railroad spurs. It was a prime target for the Luftwaffe, which had a base in Petsamo, Finland, barely 60 miles from Murmansk. By the time I got there, the Soviets had installed so many heavy anti-aircraft guns and brought down so many planes that the bombing was greatly reduced. At last, we were ashore in Murmansk. Kamal says, I find that pretty strange too, that no drinking on the ship. Yeah, let the brothers drink on the ship. Have a beer after a long, hard day of getting torpedoes shot at your boat and the possibility of freezing to death in the Arctic Ocean. Anyway, at last we were ashore in Murmansk. Formerly, the Russians had given a $125 bonus to each seaman for making the run. This was a justification and provided money to spend in port. But at the behest of the U.S. government, they had stopped this practice. We drew money from the captain to spend ashore. At last ashore, the Russian language sounded beautiful to me. On the voyage over, I had spent several hours a day boning up on my Russian. Once ashore, I became fluent again and found myself translating for my shipmates. So frustrating that Harry just didn't decide to stay in Russia. You get what I'm saying? Like, he's suffering all these indignities in the U.S., even facing racism in Hawaii. Brother, if I spoke fluent Russian, you would not see me nowhere in New York, San Francisco, New Orleans, none of that. Y'all can have that. Man, this should be in the Guinness, says Kamal. For real, brother did the most traveling. I can't think of any other black man that traveled this much. You know what I mean? Like, this is insane levels of traveling. And half of it he's not doing in the military. You get what I'm saying? Like, brothers travel. You know what I mean? American brothers travel. But most of the time it's at, on the dime of Uncle Sam. This brother is traveling. At first he traveled to France by Uncle Sam. But this other stuff, he did it for political reasons. He's moving because he's a part of the union. He got a job. You feel me? This is dope. This makes me want to work on a ship. I wonder if my wife would leave me if I worked on a ship. If I told Acti, baby, I got a job aboard a ship and we're going to sail around the world delivering cargo and goods. Also, we're going to join a union and foster revolutions in Latin America and Southern Africa. This is going to be my new life. And I'll come back to port every now and then. You'll see me, but I'll be gone for months on end. Would you accept this? And I'll send money home. I wonder if she'll say yes. I wonder if Acti would say yes. Or if she'll be like, boy, bye. I don't know. So at last ashore, the Russian language sounded beautiful to me. On the voyage over, I had spent several hours a day boning up on my Russian. Once ashore, I became fluent again and found myself translating for my shipmates. There was no doubt Murmansk was a frontline town. There were only two places to go for relaxation and diversion. There was the International Seamen's Club and the International Hotel. At the club, there were often American movies and dances on a Saturday night. The crews from the convoy crowded into the Seamen's Club and were soon drinking the good old Russian vodka. But we soon discovered that vodka, unlike whiskey, was not a liquor to be drunk neat, as was the American custom. Under the influence of the vodka, the meekest fellows soon became roaring lions. Several fights broke out. The Russians looked on with amazement at this. "What's the matter with you Americans?" they asked after finding that I could speak Russian. "Can't you take your liquor?" "Ah, well, they're just blowing off steam after the terrible tension of the voyage," I answered. Thereafter, the Russians restricted the Americans to one drink of vodka in the club, which was equivalent to a double in our measure. On our part, a few of us union guys got together and constituted ourselves as an ad hoc committee to maintain order ashore. We served notice that henceforth any seaman who caused trouble and was giving the crew a bad name would have his shore leave taken away for the duration of our stay in port. We posted notices to that effect on the bulletin board of the club. The Russians were very pleased with our self-disciplinary action. My Russian came right back, and I spent a lot of time in the clubs and met a whole number of Russians. They took me around to the factories and Russian clubs. Among my friends was the ship chandler, who took me out to his home and introduced me to his family. I was sitting in his office one day when two white American seamen came in. They asked the chandler if he could sell them some vodka. He told them that he wasn't permitted to sell to individuals, that they would have to get a permit from the captain of the ship. The chandler could understand a lot of English, but he couldn't speak the language, so I volunteered to translate. My proffered help was met by a hostile stare by these two drunks. I heard their drawl and knew where they were from. One, the most belligerent, glared at me. "Who's talking to you? Keep out of this," he growled. "Well, I know Russian and I thought I could help you." "We don't need your help. We're from Texas." Dun, dun, dun. "Well, good," I rejoined. "Some of my best friends are from Texas." Oh, God, Harry. Harry, what are you doing, buddy? What are you doing? Let these crackers suffer. Let them crackers suffer. Anyway, I stood up and put my hand on the water bottle on the chandler's desk. They turned and walked out of the place. The chandler was talking was taking it all in, apprehensive that something was going to happen. "Comrade," he said, "I'm so glad you didn't allow yourself to be provoked." He told me that a year ago, a black seaman had been killed right there in Murmansk by white seamen. Just white men spreading their racism all across the world. Their tentacles, their evil, nasty tentacles. White American men. Horrible, horrific. How are you going to kill a brother in the north of Russia, in the North Pole? "Do black people always have to fear for their lives in the United States?" the Russian man asked, puzzled. "Well, one can expect attack at any time, but not all whites are hostile, and blacks have their own communities." He seemed puzzled by the whole thing. "I guess it's like the Jews under the old regime," he said. "Precisely," I agreed. I went over to the International Hotel and joined some of my white shipmates sitting around a table. I told them about what had happened at the Chandlers. Just then, the two fellows came in and sat down at the next table. One of my mates, a reconstructed Southerner, Texas Red, we called him, got up and started talking loudly about goddamn rednecks. The two slunk out of the bar, and that was the end of it. We figured that they were members of the SIU, a Jim Crow seamen's union. Another night, I came into the International Hotel, and after checking my boots and coat, I saw a group of young Russians, men and women, standing in the lobby. It was on the eve of the anniversary of the Russian Revolution. They saw me speaking Russian to the attendant, so one young Russian approached me. He was a small fellow dressed in the Georgian manner, with long coat and hat, and soft Caucasian boots. "I think I know you," he said. "Weren't you in Moscow some years back?" "Yes, I was," I answered, surprised. "Don't you remember my sister Vera and Era?" Vera and Era were two young women in our circle. "Oh yes," I said. "How are they?" "I was just a small boy when you would come around." Vera married Patterson, the American black man who came over with the film troupe. He died in the evacuation from Moscow. "Oh, I'm sorry," I said. "How is she doing?" "Fine," he said. "She has a nice apartment and her two sons are coming along well." I was just about to ask about Ina, who had been a part of the same circle, when he broke off, explaining that he had to go to a performance as he was a member of a dance troupe. "Meet me back here tomorrow night," he said. I came back to the hotel the next night, but he wasn't there. He probably had another performance. I didn't know his name or how to ask for him. Sadly, I never saw him again. Not too long after we arrived in Murmansk, we received word that the Von Tirpitz had been sunk, November 12, 1944, in a successful attack by 28 Lancaster bombers of the Royal Air Force. This was certainly welcome news, for it meant the end of the major German naval threat to convoys on the Murmansk run. We were relieved to know our return trip would not be threatened. The human enemy was more or less taken care of, but the old enemy, the sea itself, was there to be reckoned with. The Norwegian Sea was a brutal sea, particularly rough at that time of year. The terrible gales buffeted the convoy and dispersed it over the whole area. Separated from the rest of the ships, we were forced to run alone. The decks fore and aft were awash continuously. We struggled into Loch Ewe one by one. The return voyage was fairly uneventful, but even that late in the war, German submarines were still a very real threat. I remember we were almost home, just off Buzzards Bay in Massachusetts. There was a submarine scare, and depth charges shook the whole ship violently. One of our mates, a fireman, was down in the quarters counting up his hours. He came up frustrated as hell. Every time I started counting, a depth charge would go off and I'd have to start all over. It was 17 below when we docked in Portland, Maine on January 11th, 1945. It gets negative 17 degrees in Maine? God damn. That night, we took the train to New York City. The Russians had given every seaman at Murmansk a gallon of good vodka. On the way down to New York, we broke them open and shared them with the passengers. The first thing we did when we got off the train was go to the Cafe Society downtown and see Billie Holiday, the black singer. After a week or 10 days in New York, I took the train home to Los Angeles. I was happy to return to Bell, and we had a warm reunion, exchanging stories, discussing the war, and the political developments. Happy to hear that he's, back with his lovely wife, but still, how does she feel? I would like to know more personal stuff in this text, and that's the sort of frustrating thing, especially when he talks about the women in his life. You know what I mean? Like, How did his wife feel that he was gone for like damn near a year on a boat with torpedoes flying at him off in Russia and Maine and New York and all sorts of stuff? What did she think of that? Kamal says, I dated a girl near Buzzards Bay. And in Maine, let us know. Let us know what the Maine snow bunnies are like. What are the Mainers? The Mainers. Have you ever seen did you ever see a Maine Coon? And by coon, I'm talking about the cat. So YouTube, don't block me. I'm talking about the cat. There's a giant cat called the Maine Coon. It's a giant, big pussy. It's a very fat pussy. Great question. I too would ask about the wife. I too would ask the wife. Yes, I would ask my wife how she would feel if I was to join a merchant marine ship and sail around the world for months on end, making big bucks and sending it home to her while I'm traveling and going to different places. I don't know. Anyway, I'm going to continue here. It wasn't long before I became anxious to get back to sea. In March, I signed on a motor ship we called the Turk's Knot. It was smaller than the Liberty ship, but brand new, just out of the yards. It carried the most modern equipment, along with a crew of 13 plus the naval gun crew. We sailed in early March for the Pacific War Zone. It was understood that our destination would be the Philippines, with stops in Honolulu, Wake, the Truk Islands, and Guam. Our ship would then shuttle between New Guinea and Manila, carrying installations and other war material the Americans had been forced to leave behind as they moved northward island by island. Our first stop in the Philippines was the port city of Cebu, located on an island of the same name, right in the center of the Philippine archipelago. Cebu was right next to the island of Mactun. There in 1521, Magellan was killed while circumnavigating the earth for the first time. Cebu, surrounded by lush tropics, was a beautiful town, as were its people. Paul, our Filipino chief cook, took me on the rounds of the town, introducing me to many friendly and hospitable people. Now the brother's in the Philippines, man. Now he's I'm jealous. I need to join a ship. I'm going to join the crew of a ship. I'm going to travel around the world on the crew of a ship. And Acti has to come too. Acti has to come too. We have to, this is the life. Why didn't I think about this? Join a merchant marine ship. Join a shipping vessel. Pop up in the Philippines, pop up in Murmansk, Russia, all types of stuff. Kamal says, I lived in Maine for 3 years. I've encountered, but their winters are exceptional. Yeah, the Maine sounds like a interesting place to settle. I don't know how to feel about Maine because Maine, is a blue state, great coastline, a lot of mountains, not that violent or dangerous, though they did have that massive mass shooting. What was that, last year or 2 years ago? I forgot. But you never hear anything bad about Maine other than, Stephen King getting hit by cars, old white people buying like vacation homes. You know what I mean? But I wonder what Maine is like. I don't know. I feel like it might just be more American sprawl, though. You know what I mean? You need to have a car. There's no good public infrastructure. No health care as well. And, of course, everybody's got a gun. And, of course, even though it's a blue state, there's still going to be, like, racist white folks and stuff like that. I don't know. Let me know what Maine is. Fun fact, Maine is the whitest state. And so it's probably definitely not the safest state. Maine is also probably the state with the most bestiality. Maine is the state most likely where the most child pornography arrests are made. It has to be. It has to be. If that's the whitest state. The most instances of pigs getting fucked. I'm sorry for ranting. I'm sorry. I'm off my square. This is the thing Kareth J warned me about. Let me get off that. Anyway, let me continue here. Cebu, surrounded by lush tropics, was a beautiful town, as were its people. Paul, our Filipino chief cook, took me on the rounds of the town, introducing me to many friendly and hospitable people. We left Cebu for Manila, the capital city on the big islands of Luzon. The Bay of Manila was clogged with sunken vessels, a virtual graveyard of ships. They were undoubtedly an overspill from the crucial battle for the Gulf of Leyte, which took place on the eastern side of the islands on October 1944. It was here that Admiral Nimitz' fleet had put the finish on the Japanese Navy, and MacArthur's troops returned as he had vowed. The wreckage was so great we had to anchor a mile or two out of the harbor and go into town on water taxis. In Manila, a friend and I ran into a group of revolutionary students and intellectuals who had ties with the Hukbalahap guerrillas, or Hooks. They had been active in the anti-Japanese resistance movement and bitter struggles against the traitorous compradors and landlords who had aided them. They told us how after the Hooks and the underground had helped to recapture Manila, they had been disarmed by American troops. They were bitter and sharply critical of MacArthur's hostility toward the popular democratic movement. His clear intention was to return to the status quo of colonialism. They gave us lots of their literature, and during the following months of our shuttle, we saw them whenever we were in Manila. From Manila, we would sail southward to New Guinea, stopping at the small port town of Hollandia, Wewak, and Oro Bay, all on the north coast of New Guinea. We would gather our cargo of war material and return to Manila. The round trip of some 3,600 miles would take about 14 to 20 days. Homecoming at war's end. And we're about to wrap up this chapter right here. We're on page 527, and so we're going to be finishing at 529. So literally one more page, and this will be the end. It's been a very long read. This has been one of the longest reads of this book, but once again, we're trying to finish up this text because we got school coming up in a few weeks. We got a lot of work to do to make some money because, boy, is your boy underwater. My God, my God. But we still take time to, make a lot of sacrifice, because I could have done something today to make some extra cash, but I'm making that sacrifice to be out here with y'all, learning with y'all, reading with y'all, and, sharing the knowledge and also doing the knowledge myself. So let's read this last section. Homecoming at war's end. In April, we received news that Roosevelt had died. The news saddened the crew. Everyone seemed to realize that Roosevelt's death marked the end of an era. Early in the summer, a letter from Bell reached me in Holland. What you doing in Holland, boy? Anyway, my fears were realized. The Communist Party had been dissolved, and the Communist Political Association, or CPA, had been founded in April 1944. Bell informed me of the recently published Duclos letter and the removal of Earl Browder from leadership. Duclos, then secretary of the French Communist Party, sent a letter to the National Board of the CPA, which was received on May 20th. In this letter, he characterized Browder's Tehran thesis and the subsequent dissolution of the party as a notorious revision of Marxism. The publication of the letter opened a floodgate of criticism with regards to Browder's position. It came at a time when events were rapidly proving that his theory of class peace and national unity under the leadership of the monopolist were grossly incorrect and did not in any way correspond to reality. The Duclos letter opened the way for struggle in opposition to Browder. The groundswell of opposition reached the national leadership and led to the Emergency Convention on July 26th through the 28th in 1945, where the errors of the past were exposed and the party was reconstituted. I was very excited by this letter and anxious to return to the States. I was not disappointed, therefore, when we learned that our ship had developed engine trouble and our scheduled 12 to 18-month voyage would be cut short. We had scarcely left New Guinea on the trip home when news came over the ship's radio that an atom bomb had been dropped on Hiroshima. It was August 6th, 1945. 3 days later, we learned that a second and more powerful bomb had been dropped at Nagasaki. We knew that it would not be long before the Japanese surrendered. What we didn't know, and what has generally been overlooked, is that the day after Hiroshima, the Russians invaded Manchuria in a powerful two-pronged offensive. The devastation wreaked by the atom bombs was indescribable, but in details were not fully known, either in Japan or the United States, until months afterward. But everyone in Japan was aware of the Russian invasion, and it was probably this threat of war on two fronts which was a considerable factor in forcing Japan to accept the reality of its defeat. I landed in San Francisco on August 24th, 1945, 10 days after VJ Day. I immediately called Bell, and she came up to me. The emergency convention to reconstitute the party had taken place the month before. For the first time, I was able to study the Duclos letter, as well as the documents from the convention. Included in these was the letter written by Foster opposing Browder's Tehran thesis. Foster had submitted the letter on January 20th, 1944 to the National Committee, where it was rejected overwhelmingly. Wait, William Z. Foster is still alive? I thought he died already. Anyway, it was not until the emergency convention that this letter was made public and anyone outside of the National Committee knew of Foster's opposition to Browder. We spent a week or so relaxing and discussing what we should be doing now. We decided to go back to New York. I went first to find an apartment. Bell packed up our belongings in Los Angeles and closed the apartment. So, interesting stuff here, very fascinating. I guess that chapter can be summed up as, Daddy, what did you do during World War II? And then just a flashback, like South African apartheid, Indian curry, shipping in mermaids. He makes me feel, this is the thing, man. This is why the boomers were the worst generations, was the worst generation, because their fathers did some real shit. You know what I mean? The boomers just grew up in the suburbs, listened to the Beatles, smoked a little bit of weed, and then made money on Wall Street and blew the earth up by, flooding plastic into the ocean. Meanwhile, their dads sailed all across, sailed across the north of Russia, dodged torpedoes on merchant ships, did wild shit. There will never be a generation of men like that, bruh. We are lesser men. We are lesser men to these people. Mwah. Mwah. We are lesser men. My wife does not deserve to kiss me, or I do not deserve to kiss my wife, because there will never be men of such caliber. You feel me? That's insane. Anyway, I'm going to wrap it up here. We're going to go to this last comment from Kamal. It did feel relatively peaceful, but dating was least desirable since the median age in Maine was 50. And yes, several girls I dated had their sick-ass white man stories, hence the color crossing. Shout out to Kamal for sharing his story in Maine. Glad he survived Maine. You could have got yourself a nice little rich cougar. You know what I mean? Rich cougar. A slim, thick, rich cougar who could leave you her inheritance. I'm joking. A lot of weirdos, of course, were also in Maine, either deprived of kitty cat, coming out in marriages to women. Unfortunately, Maine, while usually a top 3 safest state, could be the most desolate. I also imagine that also in Maine, there's a lot of people doing a lot of methamphetamines and drugs and, basically just getting high all day, which is not good. Not good. Let's not get high, brothers. Anyway, I'm going to wrap it up here. I've been on live stream for quite some time. Next time we read, we only have 3 more chapters. 3 more chapters left. We have Browder's Treachery, chapter 20, A Party Weakened from Within, chapter 21, and of course 22, Revisionism Takes Command. We might read the epilogue as well, so that might count as 4 more episodes or so. But essentially, we got 3 more episodes to go, and then that's a wrap here, buddy. So looking forward to reading with y'all. I'll catch y'all tomorrow. Listen to the previous episodes, all of them, and catch up on this book, this wonderful book. And shout out to everybody who tuned into the chat. Shout out to Nelson Moreno. Shout out to Kamal. And shout out to everybody who's going to watch in the playback. Y'all be easy, and peace.